You're listening to the FJ Talks podcast, where faith meets everyday life. Read your Bibles and say your prayers. Let's get into it, guys.
Welcome, everybody, to the FJ Talks podcast, episode number 10. We're very thrilled to have with us our first elder to join us. So we're very excited about that. Elder Brother Kirk Huber from the Clovis congregation. He was recommended to me as a guest that had a lot of knowledge in the Apostolic Christian Church of Nazarene church history. And I've always been intrigued by his data and his knowledge and his perspective and his just his view of Scripture. So I'm really excited for tonight. So along with my co-host John Steffen, who's down in Florida, I'm here in Colorado. And we have Brother Kirk in Clovis, California. So I guess tonight, just to kind of start it off as usual, we like to really make it personal. Really, some of the times you see somebody talk from the pulpit, you don't really get a chance to know a lot about them. Here's another opportunity as a congregation that we could get more interaction, more conversations, that more people will be able to learn tidbits about Kirk and each one of us as we go through this. So I'd like to start, Kirk, if you would just kind of give us a brief timeline on your history, where you're from, where the Huber family, stems from, and I know we're going to dive into the topic tonight of church history, and we got a lot of churches to go through. But let's kind of get some context and kind of where you come, what area you come from.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, yes, I have been an elder in our churches. I am now the third longest serving active elder from our eldership. And it's only because Brother Jim was 20 minutes earlier than me. They interviewed him first, so he's ahead of me. But the only brother ahead of Jim and I is Brother Don Kositsky, active. My father was an elder also, but he started out in the sister church, where most of my Huber relatives come from. In fact, the Hubers from Brazil, with the pause effort there, they originally came from the sister church also. Melvin Huber, who was the first Huber in Brazil, is first cousin to my father. Anyway, my older relatives told me that the Huber family came to America from Switzerland shortly after the Civil War settled down, and they were with the church the whole time. So there's a good chance they knew the church. They were converted in Switzerland already before they got here. But that makes me like the sixth generation born here in our churches on my father's side. My mother's side started out in my grandparents, great-grandparents, they started out Lutheran. And then they came to America. The version I heard from my grandmother was that my great-grandfather wanted to ride the Titanic, but it was sold out, so he couldn't, and he took the next ship he could get. However, when I check history, it says they said they took the Carpathia, the rescue ship. When I check history, it says the Carpathia was outbound from New York, not inbound from Europe. So I think there's a piece there that someone never told me. But my grandmother gave me details of the Titanic sinking that I did not hear for another 20 years from anyone else, like the band switching from playing band music to playing Near My God to Thee when the ship sunk. She told me that like 20 years before they made the movie. And
Wow.
Other details she gave about the women screaming for their men in their life were gone and so forth. And so they they were on the rescue ship instead of the Titanic because someone made a decision. They were sold out, I guess. When they got to America, they went to Detroit, which is where the industry was at that time. This was during the time when Eastern Europe was Austria-Hungary, not individual countries. They went to Detroit because the auto industry was just starting up, and they met Nazarenes from our church and were converted there. And my mother, when she was baptized in Detroit, there were 197 members there.
Okay. So that was the first AC was in America, in Detroit?
Not the first AC in
intro to
America.
the
It was the
AC?
first AC in Detroit area. Was
No,
our
I'm saying
church.
like your family's intro to the
Oh,
AC
my
was
family, on my mother's side, it was the first AC church they went to was in Detroit, and converted
okay.
from Lutheran to Nazarene. My
Okay.
father's side was in the sister church, but there was no sister church yet. They came from Switzerland, and then when this split came, the Western Midwest, like Indiana and Illinois, went 100% to the sister church, and our churches came from Ohio and other areas. But anyway, that's right. That's a short summary of my family background. So we have a history in the church, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I saw on my father's side of the family that most families for several generations in a row were very successful in conversion rates for their children, like up to 100% or close to it. And so I valued what my father's approach in raising us.
Okay.
When we were young, probably like
What were
most.
those? What were those characteristics?
Yeah, that's what I'm just getting into here. When we were young, he would apply a spanking, which probably happened with most European families.
Mm-hmm.
And as we got older, probably sooner than I liked, like maybe 6 or 7 years old, he started to sit us down and tell us all the details of what was wrong with what we did and why it was wrong and we were being punished for it. I think I endured the spankings better than, or at least at the time, I appreciated the spankings more than the talks. But he would always filter in scriptures on the occasion, whatever it was, and make sure we understood from a biblical, godly viewpoint what was wrong. I converted by the time I was 13 years old. I think I understood some things younger because my father taught them, but I didn't follow through until I was 13 years old. And I'll just say, probably when I was about 12 years old, I remember I had a dream that was a factor here, that I saw the rapture was occurring and people who knew the Lord were resurrecting, except for they were moving in slow motion. So I tried to get on my knees and pray quick enough to be included with the rapture at that point in my dream. And afterwards, reflecting on it, I figured if there was a message for me, it was not that I'm running out of time, but that when the time comes for the rapture, I need to make sure I'm part of the group that's going. So that was a factor, but a number of things. I can't say that I had anything outstanding like a lightning bolt that told me to repent. But my father, like I said, laid groundwork very well, that I understood what I was getting into. And at the time, I determined that I chose to serve the Lord then from that time forward. Let's see. We moved a number of times. My parents moved several times. Just state real quick, he started out in Francisville, Indiana, sister church there, where my grandparents were dairy farmers, and the kids helped out until they moved out. My father was stationed in the military as a conscientious objector in Denver, and his role was in the medical field, like a medical transcriber, something like that. So he was working to heal people while the army was working to kill people. So
What year was that?
he started in 1950, and
Okay.
it's a two-year draft. So it's 50, or actually, he might have been notified in 50. I think it's 51 when he actually started the service, and he served 2 years, which was the standard, and probably will be if they ever bring it back. And so he ended up out in Colorado. My mother had gone out there to help start a church in Denver, Colorado. And 1948 is when another brother had moved out there from Mansfield. So between Mansfield and Detroit, they were the big churches back then. They sent out several families to help establish the Denver church. So my father was stationed in the Army hospital there during his service, and
So
got to know people on
Kirk,
our side because there was actually a previous church in Colorado in Monte Vista. Getz family were
Kirk,
there.
I just wanted to ask. I just wanted to ask. You had mentioned is something interesting. So what year was this when your family went to Colorado?
1960. Well, my
1960.
father was stationed there in the early 50s,
In the
and
early 50s. So
in the intervening years, he proposed eventually to my mother. They got married and lived a couple of years in Indiana first, and then we moved to Colorado Springs. I'm sorry,
okay. So
slipped the tongue there. Moved to
in
Denver
Denver.
area.
Mhm. So you mentioned something that caught my ear. So the churches in the Apostolic Christian Church Nazarene in the 50s and 60s, they are encouraging families to go to Colorado to essentially church plant. How did
Um,
what do you know
not from
about
the
that, or what does that look like?
That was not from the top level of things. It was the brother that moved first was doing his best to encourage other families to go with him.
Okay.
Something like I think a brother Boris would have done.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that sounds a lot more familiar. I'm
Yeah,
not now I've heard that before.
yeah,
Grassroots.
yes.
Okay. Well, that's
Okay.
interesting. And I mean, so we have a church in Florida, right, John? You're down there.
Yep.
That started. When did the congregation start in Florida? Do you have an idea, John?
1989 was it?
1989.
Yeah, the church was built in 1989.
Okay.
So the Pohanka family, um, Perry Pohanka and his dad, they had built that church. So
Okay.
yeah, 1989 is when it was dedicated.
All right.
So
Yeah,
there
All
was
right.
as a
believers
family,
prior to, but the church was built and dedicated in 89.
as a family, we visited the Pohankas before the building was built. They were, I think, meeting with a sister church at the time in Sarasota.
Okay. So then we'll let you continue here, Kirk, in a sec. So just confirming, it was more of ground up members had moved out there and they were encouraging others to come. It wasn't per se top down type of church planning approach.
Yeah, there was no formal administrative support behind it, but I
Got it.
do
Okay.
believe the elders back then would have supported it.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we're at the late 50s, 60s with your family out in Colorado. How big was the church in Colorado? What did that look like? Do you know?
Okay, I'll just throw in Monte Vista was a church that had up to about 18 or 20 members at its peak. It was a house church. They did not have their own building, but they were the first ones there. In the late 1800s, they moved there. I'm not sure whether it was from Tremont or from Mansfield, but one of the Getz families they moved out there.
Wow.
And
And do we know what happened to that congregation? Monte
yeah,
Vista?
there was a generation that was converted in, say, the 1930s, and they were the last ones interested. Then the family following The next generation was not. And the oldest sisters lived into their early hundreds, like 103 or 104, somewhere like that. They moved to Denver for a while and then moved back with their family. The youngest member of that family was the minister. He was in his 90s and he passed away before his sisters. But it was in late 60s, early 70s that the last three or so members passed away. Then Denver, as I said, was started in 1948 by this one brother who convinced others to go with him, which included my relatives. And around 1960, then they started, my relatives mostly, started a second church in Inglewood near Denver. Like I said, that was around 1960. That one dwindled to almost nothing, just relatives only by the late 60s. And around 1968 or 69, then our church combined back with the Denver church and moved to the building that they currently have.
And you mentioned some vandalism there as well in some of the notes that
yes,
you had written up. Was there an opposition from the surrounding area?
yeah, the neighborhood changed and different people moved in. I was still like before teenage, like about 10 years old. So I don't know all the details of what happened, why, but I do know that even during evening singing at the church, a neighbor on more than one occasion threw a brick through the window. I think more or less maybe they wanted the church building for themselves, or they just wanted us gone from their neighborhood, or whatever it was. They never justified themselves to me, but that was a motivation for the Denver church then to move in with us to build the current building that's out there.
Okay. And was there interaction with the ACCA or the our sister church?
Not yet, because there wasn't any ACCA at the time. I was long
Okay.
gone from Colorado before they moved in. I think it was the early 80s. I don't know for sure, but I think they didn't come till either late 70s or early 80s, and I'd moved on to Virginia by then.
Okay.
So then that's where I was baptized. So it was in Denver in 1971. And in 73 is when we moved to Virginia. And we were there in Richmond for about 7 years, then moved to North Phoenix. It was 5 months after they started renting a hall at the YWCA. And then I moved on
So
to,
71 to 78 in Virginia. And is
yeah,
this the Upper Marlboro Church?
no, Upper Marlboro is Maryland.
Okay, I'm sorry. Then Richmond.
Richmond, yeah, Richmond Church. And it
Richmond,
was
yeah,
70,
forgive me.
it was 73 to 80 that we were there.
Okay. So 73 to 80.
Yeah.
You're in Richmond. So this is like the Jimmy Hodges Church.
Yes, and Jimmy Hodges was there. He was not a minister yet, but he was there at the time.
Okay. How big was
And
that church?
about probably not much different than today, about 35 members.
Okay.
And he was single at the time,
All right.
Jimmy Hodges.
All right. So yeah,
So
so
then,
73 to 80, you're in Richmond, Virginia. And then from there you're in Arizona. And your
yeah,
dad is traveling or moving because of work, correct?
he has more than one reason. I prefer not to get into all of them,
Sure.
um, but yeah, he felt he had his reasons. At that age, we went along with him.
Okay. Yeah,
And
for
then
sure.
Um, and then in North Phoenix, I was there about 18 months, and then I moved on to California. And I can tell you a little bit about that.
Sure.
In North Phoenix, I was teaching Bible study, but I felt like I wanted to be busier than that. So I was praying to the Lord about what I can do for it to be more effective or doing more things, I guess. And I had a recruiter call me up and ask if I wanted a better job. And so I gave him a price above what I was making. And he came back and said he couldn't find anything in Phoenix. So I raised the price, and he came back and said I found something in Fresno. And so I went up there for the interview. There were like 5 different vice presidents I interviewed with that day, and they all agreed to hire me at the end of the day. So I moved there. And before too long, it wasn't immediately, but before too long, I found myself, we were renting a union hall for church services, and I would rearrange tables and chairs for the format of a service instead of, they had a much different setup. And then, first thing in the morning, and then I would teach the Bible study because there was no one else to teach English Bible study that morning. The church was a Romanian church, basically, still at that point. And then I was a trial minister fairly early on, not immediately, but within a few months. And when my wife's uncle was traveling, I would have the only English sermon in the morning following the Romanian, and have the opening and closing prayers because the brothers, that the few that were left, felt like they weren't qualified, let's say, to have the prayer. I disagreed with that, but that's how they felt. And then I would have the afternoon service in English again, and then I would lead singing in the afternoon then. And then Wednesday night on midweeks, we didn't have a building, but we would have our youth group meetings in homes. And there were 2 young men who lived about an hour away. So I'd get off of work, grab a sandwich, drive an hour down, pick them up, an hour back, conduct the meeting because I was the only brother there, and then and have the opening and closing prayer too. Then drive them home again after we're done, and then back home and to go to bed.
Wow.
While I was single, I
that's
really enjoyed
dedication
that.
right there.
Yeah, while I was single,
okay, hold on
yeah.
one sec. So what, you moved from Phoenix to Clovis,
It
and
was Fresno
what
back
year
then.
was it?
It was Fresno back
Or
then.
I'm
It was
sorry, Fresno.
82.
82. And so when did you become a minister? What year was your confirmation?
I was a trial minister a couple years. I think it was 84 or maybe 85 when I was
Okay.
confirmed.
So yeah, I mean
But
that's dedication, driving an hour each way to pick somebody up and hold the services. And
yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed it when I was single. Once I got married, you can't do that with kids, not that kind of schedule. So I slowed down a good bit in those kinds of things. But for me, it was what I asked for in my prayers to God, that I was a whole lot busier doing things for the church.
yeah, no, that's incredible. So your journey is through different states. You're seeing different churches. You're seeing. So what is your mindset at this point with like the feeling of the denomination, the different churches? You're essentially starting a church, the English side of a church up in Fresno. What is the feeling of the church at the time?
I think the local church was really happy to see a brother stepping in for those things. And they told me as much in different ways. And we would have activities like baptisms and other events in Fresno. It was still Fresno back then. In Fresno, that there would be 300 people visiting for us. So other people in California enjoyed coming through also, and so, like I said, I was really happy with the the environment of the church at that point in time, as well as the ability for me to be busy in the things I saw needed to be done.
Nice.
Although one brother asked me to start an orchestra too, and I told him, "You start it." I told him I have enough to do.
You got to the point of delegation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Delegation's good. You take that one.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, okay, so now we have you're a minister. You got a young family, early 80s here. You're in Fresno area. The church is growing, and just like today, right? Like so people will come up from LA and San Diego. Is that correct? Is there any
Yeah.
other churches we got, like
And
Tulare?
Torrance, not so much Tulare.
Okay,
Sometimes there's one brother who'd be there every Sunday from Tulare, but aside from that, they kind of were homebodies.
okay.
But yeah, South Bay, well, Torrance back then was included. It was kind of like any major event, the same 300 people went to see it. And wherever it was in California, the same 300 people went there. That was true for a while.
Very nice. So, and then so interaction continues now. As far as church, other churches that you wanted to mention and talk about, where please dive into it.
Okay, how much time should I take? I was
This,
thinking of going through the list I sent you, which is just
yeah,
alphabetical by state,
yeah. Let's do
and
it.
that works. And I'll just mention briefly things I remember from each. And it won't necessarily be reading off the write up, but just as a reminder of which ones I mentioned here. So the first I'm mentioning is Anchorage, Alaska, which was never a real church, but we had a few people that we had a few services when a minister would visit there. And from what I remember, the father of one of the brothers that was stationed up there um, would be one of the ones visiting to hold a service on occasion there. And this was during the late 60s and early 70s when the draft was still active. They stationed our people wherever the government decided they needed them. There's no such thing as saying, I want to be stationed here or there. And they would serve in a conscientious objector role like any time. And I remember two different couples on different occasions drove through Denver because they wanted to drive their car up to Alaska. And the only way to get there at that time was to head up the Alaskan Highway, which starts kind of northwest of Edmonton. And Denver was sort of on the way if you're starting out from Ohio or somewhere out east. So we had two different couples that drove through on their way up there. So I'm just mentioning them to say that it happened, that they existed there.
All right, and just out of curiosity here, the so this church is in. So a brother who's in the military service. Do we know where he was living prior? And then he's now
Um,
stationed in Alaska.
they have 2 year assignments, and the Army, whoever, assigned them to be in Alaska, like it or not. I know at least one of the couples that drove through, as a young married couple without kids, came, I believe, from Mansfield, if I remember correctly. And if not
Okay.
Mansfield, then somewhere in Ohio. They just headed west to Denver and then northwest to Alaska Highway.
Okay. So
And so, like I
they're
said, I
visiting a
remember
brother
two.
who's stationed. They're visiting a brother who's stationed in Alaska and who essentially is holding church services in Alaska.
That's not quite what happened. I'll
Okay.
just straighten out the wrinkles. The brother that was going to serve in Alaska was driving. He himself was the one who was drafted, and he was married at a young age, and he was driving through from his prior home in Ohio, if I remember correctly, in Mansfield, driving through Denver so that they have a car up there in Anchorage area when they arrive there. And if I remember correctly, the base is not Anchorage, but it's near Anchorage. And then in terms of holding services, the father of one of those brothers up there would fly out there on occasion to visit him. and the father was a minister. Okay, so to transition into, Lily was local in the same church here. She had no idea I had an interest with her until I proposed, but we both felt it was the leading of the Lord, and we were married here. I think we were the first, in fact, I know we were the first marriage in the Fresno church, Fresno or Clovis or whatever, the first wedding.
What year was that?
That was 1983.
Okay.
Okay. Without going into detail, some years later, there were some issues among some of the members in the church, and we, 9 of us, felt it was better to separate than try to be in the middle of things. So we started the Core School Church at that time, which eventually became Clovis. When we moved into town, we had to stay over in Fresno City and then Clovis, which is how most people remember us, I believe. Around that time that we were still in Core School, the previous generation of elders was having difficulty finding replacements kind of anywhere in the country. They came to Clovis and found that we were unified and that we could support. They originally were looking for one. They considered 2 brothers from Course Gold after the church basically asked them to not to split us up. So that was 1995 when we were put in as assistant elders. And I believe it was 3 years later we were ordained. But in terms of active elders, if you count at least as I do, back to when we were assistant elders in 95, we've served the longest for everyone other than Brother Don Kutsitsky. And he was like 3 years before us.
How long were you in the ministry before the assistant eldership came up?
Let's see. Well, again, if you count trial ministry, that was in 83. And then 95 is when I was an assistant elder. So that's 12 years.
About 12 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll just mention my father in Colorado was put in the ministry, and 4 years later, he was put in the eldership. And that was before they had assistant elder step, so he went straight to elder. So that's where we've served as elders since then. And of course, the elder body found replacements then kind of through all the churches eventually. But we were the first ones they were able to complete, so that's why they selected Jim and I. I was going to mention, before I go back to the churches, I was going to mention one notable period in our life. We felt that our calling was at that time, our church was in Fresno, I believe. My wife and I felt that was our calling, but my company laid me off, and it took a while to get a replacement. We felt that we should stay there, so we did, and we kind of figured in advance we could last maybe 4 or 5 months to pay the bills. And it went 20 months out of 26 months. I had a temporary job in between, but it was 20 out of 26 months before I had a permanent job at the end of it. And all that time we felt the calling that God would have us stay there in Fresno. And I'll just add we had less than 1 week's worth of outside help. If someone gave a donation through a third party, we didn't want to make them return it. So other than that was the only outside help we had, was less than a week's worth of wages. And the rest of it, to our surprise, the Lord provided from various resources we already had available to get to the end.
Wow.
And we
That
would not change that
that's
in any way.
another display of God's providence for sure.
Yeah,
And the fact that you guys stayed in Clovis and Fresno area, that even to the today. So how many years has Fresno Clovis Church been going?
1990.
Since 1990.
Yeah. Oh, and I'll mention the the first year, those 20 months was the first Design Start Sing we had. So we were hosting Design Start Sing without without any income there.
Wow. That's dedication, absolutely, for the Lord.
Especially when having that conviction and listening to it, right? A
Yeah,
lot of people will interpret that that's no longer a conviction, you know, and it's a sign to move on. So just being
yeah,
faithful in that conviction, that's a testimony.
yeah.
And we hear that, right? As we interview different people, John, right? I mean, the others that have come on, it's the conviction from the Lord to move to Mansfield, or from Richland, Washington to Columbus, to so the Lord is speaking, the Lord is convicting people to move or to stay. And as we're in different lots in life, financially, family, different areas of life, and who knows what is still to come, here we see some testimony of God working. And yeah, I think it's really neat.
Okay. Should I go back to the individual churches?
Yeah, let's go back to that list. So we left off at Alaska, and kind of zigzag
Yeah,
back to the last part of your testimony there.
yeah.
um
And I don't know if you got the part where I said the brother that was drafted was a young husband with a young wife and drove through Denver Church on his way to Alaska so he could have a car there. And the father of one of those brothers that were drafted is the one that would travel to Alaska and hold the service when he was there. So I don't want to misrepresent it to say there was an actual church there, a formal church, but there was something.
sure.
Okay, so
Well,
Arizona, Whitten Avenue, to my understanding, that would be probably the second oldest church from our churches west of the Mississippi. Second oldest, well, I shouldn't say that. West of the Rockies, second oldest west of the Rockies would be Phoenix. And somewhere in the mid 1920s, some members had moved out there to start a church. I knew about one family that the husband was successful in inventing swamp coolers, which worked well in Phoenix. I'm not sure if you know what a swamp cooler is. It's it's like an open-ended radiator where there's water sprinkling down and a fan blowing through it, and it cools down the house like an air conditioner, not quite as effective, but a whole lot better than nothing. And so
yeah,
he did quite well
especially
there.
in the dry desert.
Yes, yeah. So anyway, for for a long time, that was a strong church of ours west of the Rockies.
Hmm.
Um, there was one brother there who was helpful in my repentance. I won't go into more detail than that, but a brother from the Whitten Avenue Church, when I was 13, by what he said, he was helpful with my repentance.
That's
North
awesome.
Phoenix, a group of 17 members started, branched out from Whitten Avenue, and that would be 1980, but near the beginning of the year, like February or so. I don't remember the exact month, but I know it was early that year because we moved later that year and we were 5 months after them. Um,
So then which one of these Phoenix churches where are we at today?
North Phoenix, that's the second one on the list.
The second one on the list. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Whitten Avenue is. Do we know when that one closed down?
I'm forgetting the actual details of when that happened, but it was probably somewhere in the last 15 years.
Ballpark.
Somewhere in the last 15 years. And not that they shut down, but they left our denomination and went independent.
Okay. All right. So they just merged or went with another denomination. Okay. So then in the 80s, North Phoenix is started February of 80, and that's the one that exists today.
That's correct. Although at the beginning they were renting a YWCA, and that's when I lived there. And then they built what is today is the dining room. That was the sanctuary that they first built, and then they added on the current one.
Oh, okay. That's kind of cool.
So like
that makes sense.
In Northport, the let's say the founding families, as it were, are no longer there, right? So with North Phoenix, that group of 17 that originally, started that church, how much of them are still there, or their families?
Yeah, I was there for the elders meeting. The only one I saw was Sister Adeline Hayes, and I think she's the last one surviving.
Okay, yeah, because I know that the amount of time, a lot of dynamics, a lot of things shift.
Yeah.
And so she's one of the 17. She's one of the original 17.
Yes. Brother Dave Gerhardt and Debbie were a few months after us, so they were like within the first year, but they weren't original.
And I think that's it goes to show throughout time and throughout generations, there's movement in our churches. It's not stagnant, if you would. There's definite new churches that can arise from different circumstances. We see from Anchorage, Alaska, right? I mean, the times presented that opportunity, and we were flexible in order to facilitate that. That's unique.
Yeah. Okay. Next one in Arizona is Glendale, where there were a few members that branched out from North Phoenix around 1992. I don't have an exact date, but and then they were closed down by the elder body to go back to North Phoenix around 1994.
Okay.
Okay. In California, the Los Angeles church, I know there was a Flower Street church for starters, but I don't know much about it. What I'm told is that the Tremonton church in Utah, it's near Salt Lake City, a group of members moved from Tremonton to Los Angeles to establish or help establish the Flower Street church. That's what I've been told. Again, I don't know much about it because that would be well before my time.
And that's roughly what, early 1900s, right?
I think 1920s.
1920s. Okay.
Again, I'm not an expert on that, but I've heard. I know that it existed. I don't know much more. Okay, then Slauson Avenue, I understand, was one of the early locations for the church in Los Angeles. And then Pico Rivera, I was there many times visiting, and then La Puente is the current location. That until recent decades, I'll say, that was the largest church in California for a long time.
So just to clarify, these Flower Street, Salston Avenue, Pico Rivera, La Puente, this is all that same church. Is that correct?
Yeah. In Los Angeles area, it's interconnected a bit more, but this is how I understand how should I call it? The root church took this path.
Okay. Kind of morphed in from those churches. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's
okay. Next one, as I understand, started Slauson Avenue, the Serbian church, and then moved to Torrance, and then South Bay. And at one point in time, it had about 100 members. Today, with the most recent baptism, it's 5, I believe.
So it's at 5 currently. And what was South Bay in the peak? What was it? 80s, 90s peak?
The year is, I think, late 80s, because I remember
Okay.
visiting as a minister, maybe early 90s. I remember visiting as a minister, and without any special events, with no guests to speak of, I was preaching, and the whole church was filled, and so was part of the hallway. So it'd be like 300 people, just their group, or mostly just their group.
Okay. Yeah, so that, I mean that's so we go from 300 and then
That's
through
attendance.
transitions. Yeah, that was attendance for sure. So, we got cost of living, we got people moving for different reasons. LA is an expensive area. There's just so many different reasons that churches come up, cycle. This is just part of that, right?
Yeah, and I think the biggest adjustment that would be helpful, if we can make it, is to see to it that the next generation is converted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Lawndale was Romanian-speaking Europeans who originally met with the Serbian church in Slauson Avenue and then started their own church in Lawndale. I don't have a firm date for this, but I think it was around 1967 or so that they remodeled the building for Romanian language services in Lawndale.
Okay. And when is that kind of holding that same trajectory in the 80s, 90s? It was big from your experience in preaching, because it's
Yeah,
very close to South Bay, correct?
I think it was bigger, never big, but they had. I'm trying to remember. I think it was somewhere in the 40s for membership, and
Okay.
they're down to around 30, I think.
Okay.
Now the directory might tell you something different, but that's just without looking it up.
Sure.
So they've gone down as much. They've gone down some, but not as much as South Bay. Okay, Pasadena was established by a group of members from Pico Rivera in the early 1960s as an outreach, and they have more or less been independent the whole time. But in more recent years, then they shut down. I think in the early 2020s is when I think it was that Pasadena shut down. And two people that you probably know, Brother Alex Cook and Gary Jerup, at one time were members there.
Okay. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
You know. Okay, San Jose and Santa Rosa are sort of two different groups, but the same geographical area. There was a church in San Jose in the 1960s, and in the late, or as I understand it, was shut down in 1967. Again, I don't have a firm grip on that date, but as I recall, it was 1967 they shut down. They had relatives in the Pico Rivera and Whitney Avenue churches,
Okay.
family there. I don't know if you've ever heard of Milica Palish, but
Say it again.
she was a sister there too, Milica Palish, and her husband originally.
Okay.
They were members there. When the San Jose church shut down, she and a handful of other members continued to gather in the Santa Rosa area. There is one brother who was a minister in Hungary, but he knew some Serbian, so he could communicate with the other members there. And so for a number of years, they had services in the Santa Rosa area.
So I mean, it is pretty fascinating, right? I mean, we're talking about the West Coast. We're talking about literally from Alaska to Arizona, and all these different churches are popping up. So we're talking 60s, 70s, 80s. How and this is just, a handful of brothers going to an area because of work, because of circumstances.
Santa
That's pretty
Rosa,
unique.
Santa Rosa. I'm sorry, San Jose, the first one.
Hmm.
I think it was for jobs because that was the technical industry already back in the 60s. And then they somehow lost interest and didn't have enough people to keep the church going. Um,
Yeah.
and that's
I mean,
when
because Santa
the,
Rosa, like that's pretty far north, right? I mean, that's
yeah, yeah, Sister Melissa
so.
Palace, she lived in Alameda, which is by Oakland, straight across from San Francisco. Other couples that were members there lived nearby. They were mostly on the North Bay side of things. But
Yeah.
Melissa Palace drove some distance to the church in San Jose. Then when they shut down, she drove some distance to meet in homes with the brothers in Santa Rosa. And then eventually
I mean, that's
she moved to Clovis or Fresno, eventually Clovis, and she was with us when she passed away.
okay. I mean, it's San Francisco, right? It's
Yeah,
NorCal, right? I mean, that's pretty fascinating that these churches at one time were popping up, were people moving, and God having His hand in it, and it's quite interesting how they've they popped up, and then the struggles with maintaining or growth, or you know I don't know if you have any thoughts on how that the challenges of why that may be that they didn't say stick around.
yeah. Um, if I had a strong answer, there'd be a lot of churches that aren't small anymore. But I, I think I just keep it to the fact that the next generation needs to commit to serving the Lord and commit to our church.
Sure.
If you don't get that commitment, that conversion, then it won't happen.
Hmm.
Our generation is having less children on top of it too.
Yes, that's true
So
too.
even if you have a 100% conversion rate, it's still at a 30-40% margin from what it used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We move on to El Cajon. Um, it was in the late 1950s. Brother Steve Sackage established it as a support base for the Tecate effort. And the whole reason there's a church in Tecate is, as I was told, I think there were three sisters who retired and moved to Mexico where it was cheaper. They wanted a church to be able to attend. And so somewhere along the line, someone started establishing the church there. And I know Steve Sackage and others spent a lot of time traveling back and forth. El Cajon was the support base, as I said, on the U.S. side for Tecate. Um,
Hmm.
if I remember right, I was told that the church was actually like a double wide trailer unit that they converted for a church building. But anyway, in the early 2000s, they shut down. Different ones had moved away, and there weren't very many left to keep the church going.
All right.
Okay.
So that was so the still brother Steve Sakic was, you're saying, was a support for the Tecate Church, and
Yes.
brother Jose Cervantes, and bringing him to faith. Is that part of that? Does that connect that story?
Steve Sackage was, to my understanding, was not that greatly involved with the issue. It was Slavko Igic and Walter Meister. I don't know if you know Walter Meister or knew of him. He
I
was
knew of him.
he was a tall, thin man. The two of them would preach in Spanish there. They would go canvassing neighborhoods looking for people to bring to church. Jose says his the whole reason for coming to church the first time was he saw a short, skinny man and a tall, skinny man trying to load a piano on the back of a truck. Someone had donated a piano for free and they were taking it down to church. So he stopped by, helped them load, and they invited him to church. So he didn't have anything else to do, so he came, and he saw Sister Kathy there and decided she smiled too much. And then um, other things, he eventually kept coming. He was converted there. So Brother Steve Sackage, I believe he supported Brother Jose, but he wasn't involved in the story with him coming.
Okay. Yeah, I recollect the Brother Slavko being part of it, but you were mentioning Brother Steve there, and I didn't know that connection. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's cool. That's El Cajon Church, and they closed in the early 2000s, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. In the late 1970s, the mostly European membership of El Cajon started their own group in the, again, late 1970s. They exceeded capacity there and built a new church in Vista in the mid 1990s, but over the decades, they have had steady growth. And so they became the largest church that we have west of the Mississippi now.
And that is so largest church west of the Mississippi. This is the Vista, California that we know. So they were originally Del Mar, and now they're Vista.
Yes, they moved to Del Mar first, sold that, and moved into Vista. Okay,
Okay.
so the Fresno Madera Church, they like the word Madera at or the word Fresno at the front, but I think it's obsolete. They started out in Fresno. That's where I moved to when I moved from North Phoenix. Um, and it was mostly Folia families who established the church in 1977. It was mostly Romanian. Grandparents on both sides held Romanian services, and I spoke in English, or Lily's uncle did when he was home. They completed building their new church in 1990. I was there for that. I helped work on it. I probably laid 2/3 of this roofing tile, among other things there.
Nice.
So in recent years, they've lost most of their attendance. I'd rather not go into more detail than that, just saying it's a fraction of what it once was.
Does it still exist today?
To my understanding, yes. And I hear conflicting stories that they may not have a local minister, so they view live stream.
Okay. Okay.
But it's just a handful at this point.
Sure.
Then Corsical, which became Clovis, we separated from the Madera Church. I mentioned briefly earlier we had differences and felt it was more peaceful and better for all of us if we moved on. So we started out in Corsfield and then on to Clovis. We were able to purchase a church building in Clovis in 2004. And I'll just give a little bit of brief there. The price tag, if I remember correctly, was $250,000 for the building back then. Our church, we didn't have that money. We had like $50,000 put down, but we didn't have the income to qualify for a loan of any kind. But the selling church agreed to carry payments for 3 years, which was a little bit steep for us, but we kept the payments for 3 years for buying the church building. And at the end of the 3 years, we needed to refinance. We found the California Baptist Foundation. They're into finance for churches, and they came by to review our church building to see what it looked like before they approved it, and happened to arrive the Saturday of our first Design Start Sing. And our doors were open, and they could see and hear the choir standing up front singing the songs. And we were approved within a couple days for the refinance.
That's great.
Then a few years later, someone who remains anonymous to this day donated an amount that paid off almost all of our remaining balance, like 120,000 or so from one individual. And so
Beautiful.
we never should have qualified for any of that. I'll just say one more time, before we refinanced the first time, our monthly payments were a lot, and I was the treasurer at the time and noticed that our bank account had dropped to like $5.82. And then the next day, a check arrived from one of the neighboring churches, one of our churches in the Southwest region, for several thousand. And we received a total of $48,000 from different churches near us without asking for help. They just arrived on the right day that we needed it. So what we needed, and then some, like I said, 48,000 total. So
Yeah.
we never should have qualified for it on our own, but we believe God made it clear He wants us there with the provisions that He had for it.
Sounds like a familiar theme, right? I should
Yeah,
never qualify.
yeah,
Yeah. Once again, I mean, and these stories and this history of our churches and them popping up or moving or staying in place and having grit and grinding it out and God's providence. The themes are very, very consistent. You
yes,
know, and God coming through in difficult situations, and so that continues to be the message here for sure.
yeah. Okay, for the Tulare Church, Brother Steve Sackage, the same one with El Cajon, I think he was also instrumental in getting the Pico Rivera Church going. Anyway, he established the Tulare Church with the help of several members who moved there from the sister church in Francisville, back where I lived the first 2 years of my life. We knew there were a couple of sisters that lived into their hundreds again, like 104 or 106 or whatever. And we talked to them about life in Germany when they were young. They said there was persecution, and like their school teacher would hand out memory verses to everybody back then. But the verse that he gave to the Nazarene children was, "Depart from me, ye workers of iniquity." And that's what they were supposed to memorize. And so they had a taste of persecution not very different from Eastern European members. So anyway, they shut down around 2020. Their different ones again moved away or moved to different churches, and so they shut down. Okay, in Colorado, the first church was Monte Vista. I've already said a little bit about this. One of the Guest families, related either to Mansfield or Tremont, came in the late 1880s to Monte Vista. I think it was a farming venture, but they held church in their home. It was never a church building, but a house church with up to 18 or 20 members. I met like the last two sisters. I don't think I met the brother who was the minister, but I met like the last two sisters in the early 70s because they moved to Denver for a few years and then moved back. Our young people older than me used to go for regular visits. There was a youth group event to go visit Monte Vista. which back then, before they had freeways, I'm going to guess was an all-day drive. And
I mean it, and the fact that I've been in Colorado 20 years, and the fact that there was a church in Monte Vista, we're talking the late 1800s.
yes, and when the split with the sister church came, they stayed with the Nazarene side.
That's I had no idea about that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. The okay. Moving along to Denver. The Denver church was established in 1948 when a brother, Andy Main, came from Mansfield to set up a new church. He liked the area, um, and he convinced a few families to move with him, and a few more kept coming. Initially, it was mostly German families because in Europe, outside of Germany, Germans were not welcome anywhere after World War II. So they received their own form of persecution in Europe, so they came to America to get something better. And so it was mostly German families who were refugees of their own who showed up there. This one, to my understanding, there's 4 members left. And there is also a Spanish outreach who is much bigger, like over 200 members in a Spanish outreach using the building that we had 50 years ago. Okay, in Inglewood, it was around 1960. Several families, mostly related to me, and I think at the beginning there were like 3 or 4 more moved to Inglewood. There was a brother who was a sheep farmer initially, and then became a developer when the city grew. Inglewood grew his direction, and sold off his land as a developer. And he donated the land for the church, and he built it too. He had help from the other members of the church, but he was the primary builder for the church in Inglewood. He passed away, and the original members outside of my family, most were gone, and eventually we merged back with the Denver church.
So question, just a general question. Maybe you have some insight. So like the brother Steve Sackich, some of these call them entrepreneurs, these risk takers. They're starting a business. They're moving to all these different cities that I had no idea that even we had churches at any point. Can you pinpoint any characteristic of somebody who would go to Monte Vista or Englewood or Tulare throughout your history as your travels? Is there a certain type of person or characteristic that it takes to do something like that?
Well, I think, like you say, entrepreneur or outreach. I think the attitude or thinking of that generation was much more committed to establishing churches wherever he goes. Like in the Book of Acts, you can read about different that different people from the church would establish churches wherever they went. I think that way of thinking was more prevalent back then, and maybe more strongly encouraged from the leadership back then also. Like John Pop and Steve Burkhart were the only elders at one time out west of the Rockies. And they had all these churches and a growing list of churches that they were serving, yet they encouraged it more. Whoever wanted to go establish a church, if they sounded reasonably grounded, they would support it.
Okay, that's an interesting insight in kind of church planting and kind of where we're at as our current situation of the numbers where they're at. our denomination. What is our current denomination numbers, Brother Kirk?
Oh, I haven't checked recently. I would guess around 2,500.
Okay, yeah, 25,
That
2,600 is what I know
includes
it to be.
that includes both conferences. 2,500.
Both conferences, correct. Right. And so number of congregations, I think do you have a number there?
I think is slightly less than 50, like maybe 48.
Yeah. I know it to be in the 40s as well. And so those are to hear, small churches, yeah, it is quite unique. And the fact that this is part of our history and we're focusing on the West Coast, you know, we haven't even, touched the East Coast and we're looking at late 1800s and early 1900s.
Yeah,
It's pretty remarkable.
yeah. I think up through about 1970 or so, if a group established a small church, they could reasonably expect to grow into a bigger one. Now, if a church becomes too small, you reasonably expect they'll shut down.
Yeah.
Okay, move on to Elizabeth, Colorado. Brother Frank probably knows where that is.
Yes.
My uncle, two of my uncles and grandparents and aunt and other cousins and so forth helped establish a church in Elizabeth that included several families from the town there at the beginning. They built a church building. They originally started by meeting in a garage. They built a church building, be the first church south of the main highway, 86 or whatever it is, south of the main highway that goes east and west through Elizabeth. On the rise, that's on the east side, going up the hill and turn right towards Elbert. It'll be the first church that you find there.
Wow. Okay, yeah. I mean that's about
Um,
20, 30 minutes away from me right now and I did not know that church existed.
yeah, you'll find, if you ever care to look for it, you'll find my grandparents in the cemetery there in Elizabeth. Trifu and Elizabeth Jiven are in the southwest corner of the cemetery.
Wow. That's really neat.
Yeah. So anyway, eventually they moved on. They had differences with our denomination as a whole and moved on.
Okay.
Okay. So the next church, Colorado Springs, I don't really know when you started. I'm guessing in the mid 1980s. A couple of families moved into the Colorado Springs area, and initially they frequently visited the sister church in Denver for services, but later began meeting on their own. I think first at Ponderosa Pines and then at your own church building, and now a newly renovated
Yes.
sanctuary.
Yeah, I believe they were here in the visiting and I think it was late 80s and early 90s, like 90, 91 is when the first couple families came out.
Yeah, I will say though, Colorado Springs has the reputation of being one of the most successful churches that we have.
Praise God. Praise God.
Which, yeah, I would not argue with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so in Connecticut, in North Haven, there's a church founded largely by Brother Ray Pavkov. He would be, if you knew George Pavkov and the other from his generation, he would be a
Okay.
nephew, I think.
So now we're moving to the East Coast and
Yeah, well, just because it's alphabetical,
okay.
Connecticut is next. Yeah, North Haven Church was established in the 1960s. I don't know when exactly it went away or whether it left or it shut down, but it's no longer listed in our directory. I knew a couple of members there. I never visited it, but I spent some time with a young man my age
Yeah, I don't know anything
back
about
when I
I
was
at
young.
one time I did try to research that Connecticut church. Um, and I know because I was living out there, but yeah, I don't have any interaction with them.
Yeah. Do you know Dennis and Linda Delph, or at
I
least know who they
don't.
are? From North
Okay.
Phoenix, used to be. Yeah, he used to be the elder in North Phoenix
Okay.
before Brian. They lived in Connecticut and attended this church for a few years, and
Okay.
then moved to Phoenix.
Yeah, it's pretty unique. Have a church in North Haven in the
Okay,
'60s.
you know, Delaware, Wilmington. There was an outreach that held regular services for a number of years. Brother Mark Meister was in charge in the 1990s. Um, he phased it out and moved to Upper Marlboro after that. And then, of course, Upper Marlboro shut down and he moved up to Wycliffe Lake then. Okay, Coconut Creek. This was the first church in Florida and established in the mid 1980s. At one time, there was at least 55 members there, but the group left for different reasons, actually more than one, and it shut down in 2023, by my memory at least. Hollywood, this church was established as a Romanian language outreach in the early 1990s. It still exists as a small
Yes.
congregation. But Brother Roman Pence is retired now as an elder.
Okay. And then we get to Northport.
Northport. Yeah, it's. I have a short sentence because I
Maybe
don't
we
know
can
that much
ask
about
John
them.
for some info
But
there.
yeah, Northport.
How many
Yeah,
members are in Northport, John?
Today,
Yes.
we are at 48 or 49 now.
48, 49 members.
Yeah. Yeah, so
that's good.
it's
Yeah,
had its ups and downs over the years, that's for sure.
Hmm.
So I've only been attending since
yeah,
2007 myself. So it was a smaller church at
yeah.
that point. Grew to about I don't know I don't know how big it was at one point when we had an influx of people from the NCC or the DS church, and then after a handful of years, a big outflow of the same people and some others. So we
Hmm.
got small again, probably in the low to mid 20s members, and we've been kind of recovering through the process, and now back up to almost 50. Our attendance on Sundays are in the mid 70s on average Sunday now. Praise
Okay.
God for that.
Praise
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, all I can say is I visited the Pohankas before there was a church building when I was single. And also, Brother Jim and I were confirmed as elders at the elder meeting in Northport. It's been 27 years.
Very nice. So, John, as far as your
Okay.
church, let's talk a little bit about Northport, just because we have access to you.
Okay.
So your activities, your tell us about your church. Like, how would you describe it?
How would I describe it? Um, it's I don't know. I would put it one of those like small business, new business, but it's been
Hmm.
there for a while. We're kind of just reestablishing and recommitting ourselves in a sense to building the church, and we have a lot of families that are the parents are around my age, mid 40s, early 40s, late 30s, and with younger children. Now their children are starting to get baptized. And, this is going to be our third year in a row in January having another baptism. So praise God, we're having every 12
Praise God.
months, having, two, three souls being baptized. So kind of just rejuvenating and reinvigorating, so we're in that stage. So right now we're trying to develop an outreach in Northport, trying to establish, the conversation just pretty much getting started, getting people in place for that. Um, Talks and working on trying to maybe expand the church as well, to accommodate not so much for our purpose, but for those that come after us. So the mindset of trying to grow and reach more on a community level. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and trying to grow in that sense. So
Good. Well, 3 years in a row of baptisms, that's a healthy sign. Young kids, vibrant, people converting. Yeah, we have our ups and downs, and we're
mhm.
just forward still, right?
Yeah, just a lot of leaning on God, and trusting in Him. And, Brother Kirk can probably relate. There was a point in time where I had to serve a church where I'm preaching with 7 people in attendance. So now when
Yeah.
people travel and we're missing 30 people, we still have 30 something people sitting in the church. So it's our empty is a much fuller empty, which is a blessing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. That's great.
Okay. Moving on to Belgrade, there was a Romanian language church for a while in the late 1980s for several years. I did meet a brother from there. I've forgotten his last name, but we had a church for a few years there, and then they shut down. Illinois, Elmhurst, it shut down in the mid 1960s and was established sometime before that. I don't know, but it could be even in the 1800s, late 1800s, that
Wow.
was established. Elgin is a similar story, but they lasted longer. It was established before the split with the sister church. And Brother Sambajanis was probably the last minister who visited them consistently. In the 1990s, it shut down then.
Okay. Then we have Tremont.
Okay. Yeah, Tremont, I believe, is the last of our churches in Illinois. It was established somewhere in the mid 1800s and remains one of our largest churches.
Wow. Okay.
Peoria, this church was established somewhere in the 1800s, and it's no longer listed in our directory in recent years. I wasn't keeping track. I did not notice when it disappeared. But I visited both Tremont and Peoria when I was young. Near Granite City, I believe the name was Madison, the small town. This church was established somewhere in the 1800s also, and it was shut down in the 1970s or 80s. That's the last I remember hearing about it. I know that some young people, I believe a group from Mansfield, visited at least once, maybe more than once, to go visit a small church there. There was a church in Glendale established by a few members from Tremont in the early 1960s as an outreach. That's all I pretty much heard about it. It went away somewhere, didn't last very long, but there was one. There was a Glendale in Illinois. In Maryland, Upper Marlboro used to be one of my favorite churches to visit back when I was single. It was established in the 1920s. The story I heard was that people from Ohio were told that in Virginia, Richmond, they could grow 3 crops a year because of the weather, which was oversold. The farming was better in Ohio than in Virginia, from what I understand. But a group left the Akron area, and some went to Virginia and some to Washington, D.C. And they originally were farmers in Maryland. And younger generation, I believe, went for jobs in Washington, D.C., but eventually then it died out. I did see one of our top senators, the Republican Senate leader, Bob Michael, from the 1970s. He presented a slideshow of his trip to Israel in the church in Upper Marlboro, and I was there to see it. So I can say I met a top senator in the Washington D.C. area in our
Wow,
church.
that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Okay, it was shut down around 2023. Michigan, Detroit, the original Detroit church seems to have been established in the early 1900s with the beginning of the automobile industry. And as I mentioned earlier, there were 197 members there when my mother was baptized. That main church, as I understand, became Beverly Hills eventually, and a small group splintered off into what is still Detroit in their current building. And a number of that 197 members moved over to Windsor and helped that church grow a bit too. But anyway, Beverly Hills, I believe, is in the late 1950s, a group established an outreach in Beverly Hills, a group from Detroit. And that became the larger church in the Detroit area. Then,
So once again, common theme. I mean, John, you're talking about it, thinking about an outreach, thinking about movement. Churches come and go, right? These locations, we don't even recognize half of them. We had no idea like there was a church there.
Yeah, I mean, coming from my background, I
yeah,
don't recognize, 90% of them, 'cause I don't hear them in conversation,
yeah,
and, you know, it's just, this is news to me, so I'm learning a lot about the ACCN history and what was, and, when I see these lists, I'm like, wait a minute, there's that many churches in that state. It's just, it's pretty cool to see. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah. At the right point in
yeah,
time, there were that many
yeah.
churches. They didn't all coexist exactly, but
Yeah.
okay. For Minnesota, South St. Paul, there was a Romanian church there established by the 1920s. I don't know for sure when it started, but I do know for sure that Brother John Yorga Sr. was converted there before he moved on to California. John Yorga Sr. grew up there and moved on. St. Louis, um, again, I don't know for sure when it was established, but probably in the 1950s based on what I've been told about outreach from the Tremont and Peoria churches, that people moved there for their jobs and established a church in St. Louis. But again, I don't know that much about it other than I have this little write-up about our car breaking down there. New Jersey, there was a church in Wharton, which seems to have been founded in the 1800s somewhere. It shut down by the early 1960s, and I spoke to one of the former members of the Wharton Church who transferred to Wycliffe Lake eventually. But she told me some things about the Wharton Church there, and I think maybe with support from surrounding churches, maybe it could have gone well. Okay, Union City was the original church in New Jersey. It was there before the split with the sister church, because there's Union City on both sides. And it was a Romanian church where I was told that when Wycliffe Lake was built, the members told me that they allowed the Romanian churches to keep the original building in Union City, and they moved to Wycliffe Lake then. Then around 1970, the members, I said Americanized members, but the ones that are more English approach, built a church in Wycliffe Lake, and that church is still there today. At the time it was built, it was called, I think, the most modern architecture we had for our churches. If you've ever been there, you probably can see some of the architecture there. Alpha, the church was probably established in the 1800s. I don't know. I never talked to anyone from there. I just know it existed into the 1960s and early 70s. It's on the west side of New Jersey, the border with Pennsylvania, and it shut down at that time. New Mexico, there was a church using a rental facility in Albuquerque, which existed in the 1960s and shut down in the late 1970s. I knew the families that were there from Denver. Our youth group made multiple trips down there for evangelization purposes. We would have like an inspiration hour singing after we recruited people from the neighborhood to come in and attend. It did not go anywhere permanently, so they shut down then. Syracuse, I wrote up about, I'm not positive which congregation I'm talking about here, but I assume it was Syracuse. There was a congregation in Germany that was persecuted, and so they came to the United States to avoid the persecution. They landed in Ashtabula, Ohio, and established a church there, and then moved again. Which,
as an Ohioan,
I believe that was Syracuse.
I have to,
yeah,
I have to interject with Ashtabula. Just
okay. I don't have an Ohio accent. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's the northeast corner.
I twitched a little bit too, Frankie.
But that's good.
Okay. Okay. I'm part Romanian, by the way.
We share that in common.
Okay. Rochester was in the late 1960s. A few families from Syracuse started an outreach in Rochester. To my knowledge, there was a rented facility, never a building, and they shut down by the early 1980s. In Queens, there's a Romanian language church which was established in the 1990s. At least to my knowledge, that's when it started. And some of the members are transfers from Union City, which I'm assuming when Union City shut down, they went to Queens.
And they actually just had a baptism this past weekend
in Queens. Okay, yeah, I think I heard about that one.
The age of the converts was, I believe, 80, 72, and like 69 or something like that. So three older ladies, 3 older sisters now.
Yeah. In Inglewood, Colorado, we beat that. We had an 85-year-old man who was baptized.
Hey, the 11 and a half hour, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I talking to others about the parable about the men who were called to work in the morning, midday, and late in the day, and they were all paid 1 penny. Just mentioned that they all get salvation.
It's good.
Yeah. Okay, Cleveland, which became Brunswick Hills. The church was probably founded in the 1800s. I don't know that for sure. No one's ever told me. In the 1980s or 90s, again, I don't remember the exact date and haven't asked somebody. They built the Brunswick Hills Church and allowed the remaining members to keep the original Geraldine Avenue property. And that's, as I understand it. Okay, the Geraldine Avenue Church in the 1990s, the Americanized members of Cleveland built Brunswick Hills, but allowed the Romanian members to keep the original Geraldine Avenue property, where they still are. Columbia Station, shortly after Brunswick Hills was built, a group from Columbia Station a group built, Columbia Station, and it was a Romanian group. They shut down around 2000. Again, I don't remember the exact year, but I do know it happened. Akron, from what I know, is a century ago, there was only one Akron church. And again, it comes from the 1800s, perhaps our second oldest church that we have. Somewhere after World War II, they split by culture, language culture. West Akron being Serbian, South Akron being Hungarian, East Akron being Slovak, and North Akron being German. But I've been told that West Akron was as well as you can find of the original group. If there is any of the four groups that's original, it's the West Akron from what I'm told. And of course, they're still active today. North Akron, which became Vesper Lake, which became Lakeside. This was the German group that separated it after World War II. I don't know much about them, just I don't think I see them in the directory anymore. East Akron, this was the Slovak faction of the original Akron Church. They had around 100 members in the 1970s. All four Akron churches had around 100 members, and Norton was not far behind in the early 70s. It shut down in the 1980s. Norton, I don't know for sure, but it started out in the 1800s in Barberton, to my understanding. Then they moved to build the current building in the early 1970s in Norton. Medina is a small church that probably started out in the 1800s also. I knew some of the families. I visited there fairly frequently when I was single. Lodi, this church started with a group that separated from the Geraldine Avenue Church, but increased with migrants from the Ukraine. They're in the process of being fully integrated into our churches. It's not a done deal yet, but they're working on it. The 94 Church, which I call Wadsworth and nobody else likes it. I prefer the city rather than the highway number. This church is also in progress for being fully recognized.
Yeah, that church was built in
which is
was built in 1994. Actually, I was baptized in that church.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were originally in Jacoby Road in Akron as a Doroslavas church. I'm sorry?
What year again? What year?
It was,
what year was it built?
We moved there in 1994.
So it's on Highway 94,
Yes.
and you moved there in 94.
And I don't think the mailing address is Wadsworth, is it? It's like Medina.
I don't know.
It's not Medina, I don't think.
I do know the city
it's Wadsworth, where they're at.
Wadsworth, that much I know.
Okay.
Yeah. So we always were referred to as the 94 Church. Yeah. So that's how it was always referred to.
So anyway, they have their own story of how they got here from the Doroslavats, which I'll just say that's where they came from. They have an issue where their Doroslavats elders have abandoned them, essentially, and have asked if they could be received into our churches. And we're definitely making progress on that. Brother Mitch and I are heading out, and Brother Don are heading out to baptism this weekend in their church. And for that matter, they've had 7 converts in the last 18 months, which amounts to about a 40% increase based on their starting number of 18.
Good.
Okay. Mansfield, to my knowledge, it's the oldest of our churches. It was founded in the mid-1800s, and for many years has been our largest church. That's no longer true with Kitchener and Tremont being larger, but for many years they were our largest church. And I visited there many times. Ontario, Ohio, was founded by a number of members from the Mansfield Church in 1971. It shut down around 2023. Okay, Warren. This is also probably found in the late 1800s. I don't know that for sure, but a small group remains without a resident minister. But they are still active with our churches. Okay, I'm going to insert Oklahoma. I just found out at the recent elder meeting that we had a church in Oklahoma with a resident elder related to Brother Mark Meister, like a uncle or great uncle or something. And he said that there were Apostolic Christian Church of America. There was a church in the same town. The only Oklahoma town I know of that qualifies in the sister churches moved across the border to Kiowa in the earlier part of the 20th century. But so I'm guessing that this church we had was near Kiowa, Kansas, on the Oklahoma side of the border, and that they were active during the time of the split with the sister church because they talked about Brother Mark Meister talked about the sister church being there.
Do we know
Until this
what
weekend, I
year
never knew
that
that we had
was
one in
in
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma?
I don't know what year it was founded, but it had to be, I'm guessing, in the late 1800s. And the split with the sister church, I think, was around 1912, if I remember right. But they were there when there was a sister church, so they had to exist past that point for some years. So I don't know when they shut down, but somewhere in there before either I or my parents were born, somewhere in there they had a church there.
Wow.
Okay, Oregon. Portland was established in the late 1800s by the Verkler brothers. There was two brothers that started out in Eastern America and traveled to the West and established churches as they went. Parkdale, Oregon, was a brief outreach in the 1960s, supported by the Portland Church. When they shut down, one elder brother said he felt they should have kept on going longer, or trying longer, whatever. But they tried for a while there. In Pennsylvania, the Union City Church was probably established in the 1800s. That's where Ted Pavkov lives, or did live, was in that area. And I think the Pavkov family as a whole started there. I'm not positive whether it was there or Akron, but that's what I thought I heard. There was a church in Sharon, which is a town across the border in Pennsylvania from Warren, and it was established somewhere before the mid 1960s. I don't know a date for that for sure again, but I knew of it in the 1960s. It shut down probably in the 1990s. I don't have an exact date, but that's when I stopped hearing about it. In Utah, there was a town called Tremonton. Somewhere in the mid to late 1800s, there was an elder from Tremont, Illinois, that sponsored a farming enterprise of some kind in Utah, and for a number of members to be employees there. And the purpose was to do an instant start of a church transplant or church startup. Additionally, there was a brother in the church that was recruiting investors for real estate in Utah, and so a number of them moved for that purpose also. There were over 100 members in Tremonton. One of them was a sister to John Pop, the elder in Portland. So he knew some things about it. Then the last member there passed away in the early 1960s. And again, as I mentioned, a number of members moved to Los Angeles area in the earlier part of the century. There was a small outreach in Salt Lake City in the 1980s and 90s. I don't think we ever had more than 4 members there, but they tried the outreach for a while. In Richmond, Virginia, this church was established shortly after World War I because somebody was telling our members that you could grow 3 crops a year in Virginia, which, of course, you can't. And so they moved their different ones, several families, and those are there today. There's a few that have moved in from other places like Mansfield, but it's mostly then families of the church there today. And I mentioned in my write-up, one of the members there was the 7th direct generation from Samuel Fraley's first church. And the way that we know that is there was a sister who was in her 90s who told us in Slovak language that her grandparents were part of Samuel Fraley's first church. And in fact, her grandparents were Hungarian, but they moved to Czechoslovakia to avoid persecution and therefore picked up the Slovak language. And then they moved to Richmond from Hungary. Washington, Richland was established as an outreach.
Do you know the last name on that individual?
The last name changes every generation because the wife converts, but the husband doesn't, and that's consistent all the generations. The oldest sister was Elizabeth Barish, and then her daughter was Elizabeth Rabowski. Her daughter was Dorothy Smith, and her daughter I last knew as Jackie Smith, but I know she got married, and I don't know what her last name became. And then her daughter I never met, but she's the 7th generation.
So Barish was the first name you mentioned.
Yeah, coming from Europe, Barish was the name. Okay, in Washington, state of Washington, there's a church in Richland that was established as an outreach from Portland in the early 1950s. And Vic and Elsie Schlatter in the early years were working on that effort to bring in converts there. And then Canada, starting with Ontario, Windsor, this church was established by at least the late 1920s or earlier. My mother visited there as a child and knew people there. So it had to be around by the 1920s. The Toronto church was there at least from the 1940s, maybe earlier. My wife's parents moved there in the 1950s and had been established for a while. Richmond Hill, I'm guessing, was established in the 1970s. I don't know much about their history. Hamilton, I don't know much about their history, but I do know they moved to Ancaster somewhere in maybe 15, 20 years ago. Kitchener was established in the 1950s, I believe. Again, my in-laws visited there when they were living in Toronto. So they knew some of the people from the early church in Kitchener. Avon Road was originally established as Doris Slovats, from what I'm told, in the 1960s, I'm guessing, and eventually came to our side, and now Brother Paul is there, and we visited there recently. Harrow, the church must have been established prior to the 1930s. Again, my mother knew them when she was young. Rodney was established as a Romanian church in the 1950s. My in-laws visited there, I think, shortly after the church was founded. The group was started because it was a Romanian church. Waterloo, may not have ever heard of this one, was a brief outreach in the 1970s, lasting maybe 3 years, to my memory. And then London, this is an outreach that started in 2020, still being supported and still has a small group meeting there. British Columbia, Vancouver. The location name has changed over the years, but by and large we know it as Vancouver, but they've used other names of suburbs there. It was established in the 1940s or early 1950s. I don't have an exact date, but my wife, Lily, lived there for 5 years. Regina, the church was probably established in the late 1890s because I've seen a photo of the Sunday school with 80 kids in it from the 1920s, with more than 80 kids in the Sunday school in Regina. I also know that the earliest elder I know of out west was in Regina because Brother John Pop took his place or took over from him when he was no longer an elder.
80 children in a Sunday
Edmonton,
school.
yes,
Wow,
I saw the picture. I counted the kids myself, I think.
it's amazing.
Edmonton, yeah. The church was established somewhere before 1930. I don't know exactly when, but mostly by the Sabo family. The Sabo, the ones that are my parents' age, grew up there in the 1930s. There's not a whole lot of Sabos left, but you'll probably still find a couple in the church there. Thorsby is essentially a suburb of Edmonton, a little bit south of there. There was an outreach there in the 1970s for a few years. Mexico, Tecate. The church was established when three older sisters moved to Mexico for a cheaper retirement location. And then they wanted to be served they wanted a church service they could attend. And of course, I mentioned Brother Steve Sackage was part of that, and Walter Meister, another piece of it. They would travel across and hold services there. Brother Jose was converted when there were, I believe he said, around 8 members or 9 members there. And so he's been instrumental in bringing it up to a larger level, like I think 55 today or something. Sonora, a brother moved to Sonora from Tecate in the late 1990s, I believe. I don't have the exact date again, as an outreach effort. The church remains small, but they have had large VBS sessions, sometimes exceeding 400 children.
Yeah. They're doing some
And
wonderful things down
Tecate,
there.
I know, has sometimes exceeded, yeah, Tecate sometimes exceeds 300 children for
Yeah.
their VBS. So that's like Sonora, maybe 12 to 14 members, 400
Yeah.
kids want to come. And then one more I didn't have on my list, but it counts, is in Puerto Rico. There was an outreach that Brother Bob Friend Jr. Started. And I don't have my dates down here, but I think it was late 1980s he moved out there. And after about 15 years or so, he moved to Florida. And other brothers took over the Puerto Rico outreach and kept it going for a few more years. But I'm not aware that there's anything left there. And that brings us to the end of my list.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested, John, in your thoughts here. You said you're from your background, coming from NCC. We just moved through. I don't know, what is that? 200 years of history.
Yeah, I mean, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of churches and blown away by it at the same
180.
time. Like,
Yeah, I mean, they're started for different reasons, shut down for different reasons. We are myopic in our thinking. We're 2,600 members, 400 or 40 or so congregations. We think small, and we see that churches have come and gone. We see God's hand in it. I'm blown away. It's a detailed list, is an important list, and that's why we wanted to do it. This is extremely important. We just documented our elder brother Kirk Huber going through this list, and we're going to have this, documented here. So this is phenomenal, and I could see us creating this list and building off this list, an interactive map on a website. Just something where we can see the timeline and the different locations. But you could just see God's hand in this, and it's so important for us to realize throughout all these years, members have been led by God and started churches.
Yep.
That's the takeaway for
Mhm.
me. And when we zoom in on our years that we're living and our little location that we're comfortably in, and then you hear this, and whatever drove those brothers, whether it was work, the ultimate God's hand was in it. So I find that fascinating.
Even with churches
Yeah.
closing, like you were saying, Brother Kirk, one of the elder brothers said, well, that church, it closed prematurely, maybe too soon, gave up too soon. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times it's like we can take that attitude of, I'm not in the right place. I don't have the support. There's not enough going on. Um, and it's really where we need to make that choice of where's that conviction? Why are we where we are? And are we being effective? Are we committed to serving, right? Because the goal is to serve God, and the goal is to serve others. So do you give up and do you just shut down, right? It's a hard question that many of these churches and outreaches have had to face, but how many of them had to be shut down? Could they have survived, and could they be something bigger? Like you said, we go from 50 to 12 or 7, and we're thinking shutdown, where you're starting with 7, you're thinking, how big can this go, right? So why can't you get down to 7 and be like, wait, how big can we turn? How can we turn this back around? Because is it really our power or somebody else's, right? So just a lot of kind of just sobering thoughts through watching and seeing that list. Kind of, hey, this was there, not there anymore. This was there, not there anymore. So
So, Brother Kirk, what do you say? What are some of your thoughts of, you've been an elder, you see the church history. What are some of your encouragements to, our members out there who are, looking at different churches, maybe, on an upswing, maybe on a downswing, maybe looking at the numbers of membership. What are some of your encouraging thoughts on how to put this in perspective and how to have a healthy perspective on where we are today here in 2025?
Um, well, I'll quote from my father. Um, at one of his elder meetings, they spent a couple hours trying to decide what's the best approach for outreach. And finally, then they asked my father what he thought, and he said, I'm more concerned that I'm in the right spirit, or I'm properly prepared for the Lord to use me, than for what this or that approach is. It's more like make sure I'm ready for that God can use me.
Yeah, no, that's great. Having the right, being right with the Lord, and then being a vessel. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, Brother Kirk, we certainly appreciate you running through that uh, very important history. I mean, it is very granular. Um, it's going into the nitty gritty, but it gives us a perspective, over a long period of time of of our
Yeah,
history.
Yeah.
So we certainly appreciate that. Brother John, you have any closing thoughts there?
Brother Kirk, definitely thankful that you took the time to just track all this, write it down, share it with us, share it with our audience. Um, History is a huge part for all of us, and just understanding where we come from, where we've been as a denomination, as congregations, and for me, it's a lot of very new knowledge, a lot of things that I had no clue about. And hopefully, those that are watching and listening can take that away, as well and just learn something new. Because I think it's rare for any one individual to know that much or collect that much about our church history and the individual churches, because it's a collective of brothers and sisters and people sharing that knowledge with you and you documenting it. So very thankful that you did that. And like Frankie said, we've got a catalog now, right? It's going to be in video and audio, and hopefully, be something that is archived going forward. So really appreciate you taking the time and just sharing that with us.
Well, with that, as we conclude, we always mention to read your Bible and say your prayers, because that is our connection. And once again, thank the Lord and you, Brother Kirk, for coming on and being our guest. And we'd love to have you on again down the road.